All right, well, let's get rolling. Welcome to the College Planning Seminar, and I am your host, Brennan Barnard. And this evening, we are going to unpack the art of building a college list. And I say that word intentionally because it is an art and not a science. It looks different for everyone. And it's really an ongoing kind of balancing act, right? And so here to help us balance is Dr. Ashley Bennett. And Ashley is the Director of College Counseling at the Willard School. Thank you for being here, Ashley.
Thank you for the invite, Brennan. It's always great to do this work with you.
Absolutely. And you know, in a previous CGN episode appearance that you had with us, you gave us that a car analogy, right? Like the student is the driver and the parent is in the passenger seat, or the family member in the passenger seat, and the counselor is in the back seat. So Here we are in the back seat. Glad to have you in the car this evening. If you're zooming in and have questions, please, about building a college list, please put them in the Q&A. And as you'll see in the chat, we're asking people to say where they're coming in from today. And we really are going to focus on building a college list tonight. And there'll be lots of other opportunities over the next few weeks, months, to ask more general questions about the college admission process. Tomorrow night, we're going to have something that we'll have some information on. Ashley, I'd love to just start kind of, you know, as students come into your office this time of year, juniors, kind of fresh into the college admission experience, they're wondering kind of where to start. How do they build a list? What's kind of your initial direct for them?
Sure. So right now, we're in the throes of junior counseling at my school. And so our initial meetings are really general, getting to know you. I think it really works for the counselor and for the student to establish a rapport, because the better I know a student, the better I am at serving them and their needs in the process. So I would say fit, and you'll hear this word 100 times from a college counselor, fit and match, right? So we talk quite a bit about what fit looks like, and that varies per student. And so in the getting to know you conversation, I had some probative questions, but none really college focused, more so who are you, how you show up in the world, what's important to you. And as we scaffold and peel that onion, we start to get to the heart of what a good college list would look like for this particular student.
No, that's great. So you mentioned fit, right? Or some people use the word match, right? Mm-hmm. How do students, how do families focus on those schools and not kind of default to name brand or prestige, or, you know, just the names they've heard? How do you kind of expand that list?
So I'll say that's a tough one, right? Because when students are coming to us, they're bringing their hopes and dreams, their families. If they're from a different culture, they're bringing those cultural expectations along with them. And so I really don't talk to students about what they shouldn't be looking for, what they shouldn't be doing. But when we talk about building a list that fits you in particular, I like to remind a student, one, your list is yours. Right? So just because your friend has all these highly selective colleges or highly rejective colleges, however you frame it, when they have those colleges on their list, that student feels like, well, I'm not doing something, right? I'm supposed to have this type of list as well. And that's just not the case. So I would say thinking about fit for you could mean, what does the college offer inside and outside the classroom? So I won't build a list around an academic major, because Brennan, we know that can change, and oftentimes does, right? And so when thinking about academics, I encourage students to look at colleges that offer a full breadth of of majors that could appeal to them, because in the event that they do decide to change, they won't have to transfer to then find a major that appeals to them. As far as outside the classroom, what are you excited about in high school? What are things that you participate in, clubs, organization? Can you find something similar at that college? When I'm having conversations with students now, it feels very different than conversations I had when I was working in college counseling 10 years ago. And I would say the biggest difference I'm noticing is that identity comes up a lot more now in those conversations. So, what parts of your identity are really meaningful to you in the process? And how would you like that to show up in your college search? And when I say identity, it's all of it, right? It could be ethnicity, race, nationality, it could be gender, sexual orientation, all of the things that make you a full, complete 360-degree human being. Those things that matter to you, how do you want that to inform your college list? So if you're a student who is really passionate about diversity, you want a robust population of international students on campus, you want to know that there are supports available for those students, let's start there. Let's look at colleges with fantastic programs for international students, right? So it's all about that particular student and their needs. And so what you hear often in college counseling conversations is, it depends. And I know my students and parents kind of get annoyed with that response, but it really does depend because every student has different needs. And so when we're thinking about name brand, sometimes the fit for you is a big name school. Other times it's not. And so my hope is that students today are giving themselves an opportunity to think beyond what they've heard of or what they already know, and allow people who are working with them and advocating for them to expand their minds a bit.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And you know, to your initial point, the idea of comparison, right? And your friends list, and it said that comparison is the thief of joy, right? And
Absolutely.
so how do you find your own joy? And how do you, you know, you mentioned identity. So if a student has kind of done a deep dive into kind of a self-assessment, or just kind of trying to understand themselves better, and get a hold of kind of what parts of their identity are really important, how do they then take that and apply it to, like, if they know that you know, a really diverse community and international community is really important to them, then what's that next step to making that into a list?
So I'll speak specifically to diversity. So college offices or colleges and universities tend to tell you a lot intentionally and unintentionally through their website. And so I would spend a lot of time there because not everyone has the resources or the bandwidth to visit every school that's of interest. But the website is a great first resource, and go straight to DEI, right? Type it in the search bar. See if they have a diversity and inclusion statement. See if they have an office dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion. If they do, that says something. If they don't, that says something else. And so I would say it's important to really spend the time doing the research and not rely on other people's perceptions, your friends, and all those things. And college counselors can help point you in the right direction. If the website is taking you to step 3, but you really want to get to step 5, then you bring in your college counselor and we can tell you things like, hey, why don't you set up a virtual info session? Why don't you think about speaking with, at my school, Emma Willard, why don't you think of speaking with an Emma alum who attends or has attended that institution? Because the connections we can make are so broad, especially today with social media. Now I'm noticing that colleges will have, you know, University of Houston, class of 2026, and then a student can join that group and start having conversations. And so I think going beyond the rankings and the prestige and the name is so incredibly important when building a list, because there are over 4,000 colleges and universities in this country. There are more than the top 10 that are really desirable and affordable and a fit for so many of our students.
Right. And I would add that this really isn't a passive experience, right? I mean, you have to really be a researcher as you think about building a list. You know, finding out some of those social aspects, for example, that are important to you. You got to dig, right? They're going to share some information with you, colleges, but a lot of it's just going to be what they want you to hear, right? And so you're going to have to really be an investigator and you know, look up the school newspaper online, right, and see what students are talking about. And if there's something that's really important to you in terms of activism or a major or whatever it is, do a deep dive, right? Go onto their social media page, not the one that the school promotes, but on the club's page, right? Their social media, their Instagram channel or whatever. I mean, so you have to, it's not going to be easy, right? Like this is not a simple process. There's a question that just came in. Students often will switch majors. What guidance will you give for students who are interested in, for example, engineering, which is a separate college and has separate standards for admission? And you often can't transfer later. So what do you suggest to them as they're kind of building a list around that?
Right. So as I mentioned earlier, I wouldn't build a list around major exclusively, because again, their minds change. But if a student is majoring in something like engineering and then decides they want to major in something less selective, that's an easier transition and change to make. But the reverse can be a bit more complicated. So if a student is majoring in something in the humanities, for example, and they want to then change their major to engineering, there may be some additional hoops to jump through, right? And so my advice goes back to choosing a college that has a variety of things that you're interested in, because your mind will change, and it does. And I think it's kind of strange that we expect 17 and 18-year-olds to commit to a major, to commit to a job for the rest of their life, right? Like we're all still figuring it out. I'm 41, I'm still figuring it out. So I can't imagine students having it all together and all figured out at 17 years old.
Well, many of the jobs that students today will do don't even exist yet, right? Like they're not majors for those jobs. So, but I think to the engineering question, right? If a student thinks they might be interested in engineering, yes, you want to have that program at the school, but you also want to really dig into how easy it is to transfer to other majors, or how easy it is to transfer into that major. Really understanding that in the front end is important. And, another question.
Can I also say, before we move on, academic advising is something that's really important in a college setting. So in high school, students are surrounded with folks to support them. The same is the case in college, but they're expected to have a bit more self-advocacy skills. And so with college academic offices, it depends, right? So if you attend a small institution with a very low student faculty ratio, you may have an academic advising office that routinely reaches out to you and stays on top of things. If you attend a larger institution, that may not be the case. And so getting really clear about your academic advising, meeting your advisor, and maintaining that regular communication, because as your mind changes and as you experience classes, you may want to think about switching majors, and that's okay. Again, it happens all the time. But I would say you do yourself a disservice when you're operating in a vacuum. You have so many people around you who want to support. So pipe up, let them know you need the help, and they'd be happy to talk you through your options.
That's so true. There's a question that came in about how many colleges you should have on your initial list. So, maybe not your final list, but your initial list.
So I get this question very often in my office, and I know different college councils may feel differently. I don't have a magic number in mind. So the initial list for me, it could be 25, 30. I know we won't end up there, right? So this is our starting point. This is where we're having our conversation. But when I am talking with students about their goals, I'll likely add some schools for them to consider, and they come to me with their own schools. And then the conversation evolves over time, and we remove things and we add things and all of that. And so we get to a sweet spot of around 13 to 15 colleges. And I know in many schools that's much lower, but I would say in my particular school, that tends to be where our students are most comfortable. Do we have students who apply to upwards of 20? Absolutely. Is it my favorite? No. And let me say, not from a college counselor perspective, my work is the same, but from the student perspective, managing their course load as a senior, all their extracurricular activities, and then completing all of these college applications when you will only go to one. So think about the length of your list from your own perspective and your bandwidth, because it takes time, energy, and money to apply to each college that will appear on your list.
Yeah, and I think there's a benefit to thinking of this as kind of a funnel, right? Like your initial list, it could be 30, 40, 50 schools, right? And those are ones that you're exploring, you're researching, you're kind of collecting information on. You might be just kind of browsing. And then, you're narrowing that down. Maybe you do visits or either, virtual visits or in-person visits to 15 or 20, right? Or maybe, I'm not saying you go out to all those schools, but then,
Right.
slowly kind of call the list down to ideally, like you're saying, maybe anywhere between maybe one if you're applying early decision and maybe 10, maybe 13, 15, depending on the school. And it gets tricky because some states, right? You're in New York. My school is in California, right? Some state systems, like the UC system, it's one application and you have many schools. So do you count that as one application if you're applying to multiple campuses? Same thing with SUNY schools. Is it one school or is it many schools? So something to think about.
Yeah.
So there's another question here. What are your favorite resources for researching colleges or starting to build a list? Like what websites, what books, what do you recommend?
Mhm. So I'm a big fan of the FISC guide. I know that's old school college counseling, but we each get a paper copy of the FISC guide in our offices, and it helps us really work with students as they're telling us their interests and narrowing things down. It's broken down by a ton of different factors, and so I really enjoy the FISC guide. We are a Navient school. I know other schools are using other systems, but Navient has, as the other systems do, has all kinds of college research opportunities there. So we send our students to Navient. Also, Fair Test is another favorite of mine because Fair Test keeps an ongoing and updated list of test optional colleges. So that gives students a lot of opportunity to figure out if a particular college they're really interested in is offering a test optional path to admission, because the majority of our students do test. However, we do have a handful who choose not to, and they still have plenty of options available to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, Big Futures from College Board is also a good place, just for a
Mhm.
general search. If your school doesn't have a Naviance or a Score or something like that you can use, and have fun with it. I would say, as don't look at this as a task. Yes, it's work, but don't look at it as a task
Yeah.
to build a list, right? This is about opportunity. There's a cool app called Lopper. Do you know Lopper?
I
It's
don't
a
know Lopper.
it's an app that you can you kind of build a profile, and then you can they ask certain questions, and you can then it's LOPER, and you kind of swipe left or swipe right if something's important to you or not important to you, and then it builds a list. And what I love about it is that it actually it gives you the school and a description of the school, but doesn't tell you the name of the school right off the bat. You have to
Nice.
click on it and see what the name of the school is. So it really forces you to think, okay, like is this criteria something that's important to me, rather than is this school that so and so said was good something important to me. So another question here is, many students zero in on one region of the country, only one region. Any special tips for helping them to encourage other great geographic areas, like the Midwest, the South, Pacific Northwest? Some students will not have had the chance to travel to these areas, but there's a wealth of great options.
That is a question for me, and Brennan, you may be able to answer better than I can because I struggle with this, right? I'm in the Northeast, and Northeastern folks love the Northeast. And Northeast is rich with plenty of colleges, right? So the majority of my students tell me they want to stick to the Northeast. And so what I talk with students about, because they have their own perceptions of different regions of the country, particularly the South. I'm from Texas, and students know that. And so they'll say to me things like, no offense, but I really don't want to go to the South. And they have their own ideas about what exists in the South and all those things. And so I talk to them about perception versus reality, right? Because Houston is where I'm from. It's in Texas, but you will have a very different cultural experience in a place like Houston than you will in maybe a rural Texas city. The same for Georgia. Georgia is a southern state, but there are some great schools, great cities, and great people there as well. So we talk a little bit about how our perception can shape us in ways that mean we don't really get to fully experience life because we are limiting ourselves to our own thinking and our own ideas about a particular person or place or thing, and we don't get to really experience it. And there may be a ton of joy in that, right? So we break down perception. We also talk about how you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So if you're only sticking to the Northeast and you're only sticking to, let's say, small private liberal arts colleges, and you're only sticking to the colleges that are in the top 10 of the US News and World Report, how many options are you leaving on the table? How many academic options, study abroad, connecting with folks from all over the world, like all the things that you could experience if you just expand your mind a little bit, just a bit.
Well, and to that point, you also could be more competitive in an applicant at some of those schools that are outside of your geographic area, right? Because you're going to be geographic diversity for them, and they're going to want, you're going to have a better shot potentially at being accepted. So I think another great resource is CTCL, Colleges That Change Lives, right? They have schools all over the country.
Absolutely.
That you can learn about and again, some of these tools, these college search tools, they have kind of college comparisons. Like if you like this school in this area, then you'll like these other schools. And so kind of, I think the key is just staying open-minded at the beginning, ideally throughout, but kind of expand your criteria at the beginning so that you don't kind of lock yourself out of some of those decisions. Speaking of expanding your criteria, there's a question here about is US News College Ranking a good resource to help you build a list?
So I will say, for me, rankings are a part of the conversation at times, but not nearly the most important part. And so it's okay to have a general awareness, right, of the rankings, but I don't think a list should be built around that. Going back to fit, you could have those ranked colleges on the list, but are they a fit for the student? Again, sometimes those two meet. This highly ranked college is an excellent fit for this particular student. But I often wonder, if there were no rankings, how would that inform the way students think about colleges and approaching their list? And so we talked a little bit earlier about balance in the college list and likely, possible, and reach. And so with the rankings, if you're solely relying on those top ranked colleges, the majority of them will be reaches, right? And that doesn't say anything negative about the student's academic qualifications, but if everyone wants those top colleges and they only have a certain number of spots, you kind of back yourself into a corner where you end up not having a ton of options. Last year, I attended a webinar that was hosted by a few highly selective colleges in our region, and they were just kind of unpacking the decisions because last year it was a head scratcher. And so they unpacked several of the decisions and talked about horizontal list building versus vertical list building. So horizontal means a student could say to themselves, I really want to get into an Ivy, so I'm just going to apply to all of them, and one of them will take me. That's horizontal. They all have a very similar range of selectivity. They all are very similar in offerings and all those things, right? And so same, right? You could get no's from all of them.
That's some fuzzy math. The odds don't work.
They don't work in your favor if you think more highly selective means you'll get one. That's not how it works. Vertical list building is what we recommend, meaning there's a range of admit rates, right? And so if you're thinking about highly selective colleges, I 100% believe reaching is good. It's a good part of the process because sometimes you get it, right? But I also think having likely and possible colleges on a list really gives students more opportunities to have options at the end of the process. And when they have options, then you can start the fun stuff, visiting, comparing financial aid packages, comparing activities offered on the campus and finding what works best for you versus if you have that horizontal list and you get one, great, but you got one. And was it really a fit for you or was it about the name?
Yeah, and with the probables or the likely schools, what some people might have once called safety schools, they're only likely or probable if you'll actually go to them, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's something really key to think about. Like, if you're going to have a school on your list that you think, it's pretty likely I'm going to be admitted there, you should only apply there if you're really going to go there. I mean, our friend Rick Clark at Georgia Tech, I'll just quote him. He said, he just puts it plainly, it's just stupid, right? It's stupid to put a school on a list that you're not going to go to, right?
Yep.
And so as you build a list, ideally you have, maybe a couple schools at the top that are reach schools, right? Like maybe 3 or 4 schools that are reach schools, and then 2 or 3 schools that you feel pretty confident you'll get into, and that you'll go to if you get into. And then the bulk should be in that kind of target range, right? Maybe 4 or 5 schools
absolutely.
that you're excited about. Barbara Connor down at Foxcroft says she has kind of the 5 first choices, 5 first choice colleges, right? If you set out to have 5 first choices, then and you're excited to go to any of them, then you can't be disappointed. I will be a little less diplomatic than you around the rankings, and just say with rankings, I think I would use the kind of garbage in, garbage out principle, right? And so understand the methodology, right? Understand what goes into the rankings, right? Like U.S. News and World Report, a chunk of those rankings, 20% of those rankings are reputation. So it's what other college administrators think of that school, right? And so do you want to make your list around what some random college administrator thinks about a college? I would guess maybe not, but again, understand the methodology. There are some great kind of ranking type tools like Third Way that does outcome data about median pay range and social mobility and things like that. And so there are some good resources, but understand what you're looking at.
Before we go to the next point, there's something that stood out to me while you were speaking, Brennan. The Rick Clark comment. I 100% believe, I don't know if I can use the word stupid and keep my job at my school, but I do believe it is unwise to add colleges to the list for the sake of having them on the list. Like, oh, I have those safeties, but I don't want to go there. Again, more than 4,000 institutions of higher learning in this country. You do not have to have colleges on the list you don't want to attend. That makes no sense. It's not a good use of your time. It's not a good use of your money. At my school, we say, let's fall in love with our likelies, because if the reaches don't work out, we want to feel good about where we're getting into, and we're feeling good about the choices we have to make.
Yeah, that's really important. So we're getting close to the 9 o'clock hour here, but or at least here on the East Coast. But I want to pull out this question from a parent that says, my kid is overwhelmed by the sheer number of colleges. How do I help them get educated? How should he think about it? How should he think about kind of getting educated about the schools and leaning into it?
So I would say, not knowing your son's school environment and the college counseling resources available. If there's a college counselor, I would start there. If there is not a college counselor, or if they're at a larger school where maybe the college counselor has a very large load, then I would say some of the resources we mentioned earlier, those search engines, because when you're searching, on, I can't scroll up right now, but when you're searching on a lot of those websites, you can enter all kinds of things. And it's major, it's interest, region of the country, all of those things, but it also drills down even further, passions, goals, and all of that. So if he's working with just a sense of overwhelm, then I would say start there. It's a light touch. Start working on some of those things and see what cranks out, because that can give him a great starting point. And he may not attend any of those colleges that that search engine revealed to him, but it can inform the way he moves forward as he learns more and more about what he really wants out of a college.
Right. And I is actually one of my parents, because I could see the name. So we'll talk. But you know, I think the another just kind of good way to approach it is to start local, right? To, if you can, visit a couple of schools in your area just to kind of hone in on your criteria and see what's important to you, and then go to your counselor or go to one of these search engines, and armed with kind of what you know about the schools you visit, you can have a better idea of kind of where to drive that.
And I would add, Brennan, when
Yeah.
you're visiting those local colleges, choose different types of colleges in your local area: public, private, small, large,
Absolutely.
STEM-based, performing arts-based, right? To get a full idea of what the feel is like on those campuses.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we are out of time tonight, but we are doing these every other week. And the next one will be with an admission officer from Colgate University, and will be about college visits. And so we're going to be kind of leaning into a lot of the stuff we talked about tonight, but in different detail. Tomorrow night, we're going to have the kickoff event for juniors and their families. And we're going to have 3 different admission officers talking about the college admission process and answering all your questions in the hour-long Q&A. So we hope you'll join us there. There's some resources for building a college list in the chat, and some exercises you can try about kind of balancing your list, and kind of thinking about the types of places you want to be, the criteria. So I hope you'll look at that. And hey, Ashley, thanks so much for joining us. And
Absolutely.
and thanks for all you do for students and for families. And thank you all for joining us this evening, and have a great night.